Hey guys, John here with an extended look at the frame rate in Rise of the Tomb Raider on Xbox One. At its base, Tomb Raider targets 30 frames per second, and it often hits that target. Yet throughout the game we regularly encountered performance drops and screen tearing that interrupted fluidity. These issues can crop up in a number of different situations. Take this section for instance. We have a small room here with just a handful of enemies to eliminate, yet performance slips under 30 frames per second throughout the sequence. As we mentioned in the analysis, this is one of many areas in which motion blur is disabled as well, leading to even less fluidity. After we clear the room out, the game transitions over to a real-time cutscene. During these sections, the game switches to 1440 by 1080p with vertical sync engaged. Despite the drop in resolution, however, we still manage to see some performance dips. These sequences definitely prove quite demanding for the hardware. Alright, moving on to the next area. This next sequence plays out in a much larger space than the last, and it manages to hold a more consistent level of performance. Okay, so we see a couple of minor performance dips right here at the beginning, but by and large, it's very stable. We tried to mix up some stealth and action gameplay during this scene, yet we found that it's surprisingly easy to remain hidden in stealth unless you actively attack the enemy. For example, let's take this canister here and fashion a smoke bomb. Toss it into the crowd, and these guys become easy prey. We just swoop in, take them out one by one, and the frame rate doesn't budge an inch. Now, despite our cut-through tactics here, the guys in the distance there, they don't notice anything. But we'll go ahead and change that by grabbing this lantern here. After throwing it, even with the smoke in the foreground and in the background, and the enemy on patrol, the frame rate still holds steady. So what's going on here? Well, let's move on to this next scene. In this other area, we're actually in a peaceful village. We're going to cross the bridge here, and you'll note as we approach this crowd, the frame rate then starts to drop. Once again, we're looking at about 25-26 frames per second with screen tearing. Is it the crowd causing this drop in performance? It doesn't really seem like that should be the case, but as soon as we look away from them, the frame rate immediately jumps back up to 30 frames per second. Also note how in this scene, and the previous two in fact, motion blur was disabled. This happens quite often during the game and seems to coincide with more demanding areas. Moving on, we have one of the more demanding sequences waiting for us. This area set under the stormy night sky was first shown off at Gamescom this year, and it looks excellent. Now, we start here in the bushes sneaking along the perimeter, and you'll note that the frame rate actually holds pretty steady at 30 frames per second. We found that remaining hidden in this area generally keeps the performance levels up. But as we close in on the fire pit up here and the group of enemies around it, you'll start seeing some dips. It does pick up again for a moment, but as we go over to the left of this building, you'll see even more serious drops in performance, including a low recorded at 23 frames per second. So what we've been noticing throughout the game is that if you maintain the cover of stealth in many of the sequences where slowdown can occur, the frame rate generally stays higher. Once you engage the enemy head on and you get into a full-on firefight, however, we start seeing drops to around 25 frames per second. Of course, we ran across a number of other areas which exhibited performance problems without any other characters on screen. Running around this spot, for instance, we see dips under its 30 frames per second target, as you can see here. Down on the ground, we see similar results here as well. Nothing really is happening at the moment, but clearly this particular scene is placing a load on the system that prevents it from holding steady at its target frame rate. Honestly, the whole thing would feel more consistent with a triple buffer V-Sync solution, we feel. Okay, moving on to our last section, we have one more infiltration area. Now, for the most part, this sequence actually manages to hold 30 frames per second. Now we see a dip here as we cross this line and go for taking out this first guy here, but after that, it's smooth sailing. Alright, that about wraps things up for us. The bottom line here is that Rise of the Tomb Raider turns in performance that falls somewhere between the last generation version of Tomb Raider on PlayStation 3 and 360 and the definitive edition as released on Xbox One. It often holds a consistent 30 frames per second, but busier scenes and the more demanding areas that you might explore do tend to exhibit screen tearing and slowdown. Anyways, that's all for now. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more, be sure to check out the rest of our YouTube channel. Until next time though, this is John signing off.